The night my life took an irreparable detour started like any other. I was on my way home from a business trip, eager to put long hours on the road behind me. The passing highway signs counted the miles until I could fall into bed. But the twisting rural routes I took to make up time led me somewhere I never could have expected. As the last rays of light faded from the sky, I realized I hadn't passed a gas station or rest stop in over an hour. The fuel needle was dipping close to empty, and my stomach rumbled in need of a pit stop. Just then, I crested a hill, and a flickering neon glow appeared in the distance. An oasis in this deserted landscape. The tired red letters spelled Helen's Diner. I coasted the last few hundred feet down the hill and pulled into the mostly empty lot. My watch read nearly midnight, but a few patrons could still be made out through the windows. Stepping out of the car, I felt a strange unease wash over me that I couldn't quite place. This far-flung diner was clearly past its prime, tucked away on a remote stretch of road. But my grumbling stomach urged me forward. I'd have a quick bite, refuel, and put this place behind me. Little did I know I had just turned off the main highway of my existence onto a twisted detour from which there would be no return. A little bell jangled above me as I entered the diner. It was dimly lit and empty, aside from an elderly waitress standing behind the counter, seemingly lost in thought. She glanced up as I slid into a vinyl booth by the window. I noticed a name tag pinned to her uniform. Betty. "Not often we get strangers stopping by this late," Betty remarked as she poured me a cup of black coffee. Her voice had a faraway tone to it. I gave a polite smile. "Saw your sign from the road. I've been driving for hours. You were a sight for sore eyes." Betty nodded, taking my order for a burger and fries. I sipped the bitter coffee slowly, glancing around the diner. The floor was black and white checkered tile, walls wood-paneled. A jukebox in the corner looked straight out of the 50s. It felt like I had stepped back in time. "You live around here?" I asked, making small talk. Betty frowned. "Lived here my whole life, not that there's much to it. I've worked at this diner since I was 16 years old." I leaned back, taking in her weathered features. She had likely been a beauty in her youth. "It seems like a nice, quiet town." "Too quiet if you ask me," Betty sighed. "But I suppose I can't complain. Not at my age." We chatted about the town's history as I ate. How it used to bustle before the railroad shut down, jobs dried up, and people steadily moved away. Before long, she was the only waitress left at the diner. The vacant streets I had driven through reflected the town's decline over the decades. Despite the circumstances, I enjoyed Betty's hospitality and stories. The food warmed and satisfied me. As I paid my check and put on my jacket to leave, I felt reluctant to continue my lonely journey through the night. "Thanks for stopping in," Betty said as she cleared my table. "You're welcome here any time." I gave her a grateful smile. "You know, I think I will stop in again if I'm ever passing through. It's nice finding a place like this out here." Betty nodded, her eyes glistening under the fluorescent lights. "We always appreciate the company." I stepped out into the biting night air, casting one last look at the fading sign. For reasons I couldn't explain, an unsettling feeling gnawed within me as I gazed back at the diner. I pushed the thoughts aside, chalking it up to road weariness. I slept restlessly that night in a motel on the edge of another rural town. As I lay there, scenes from the diner played over in my mind. Betty's kind smile, the jukebox tunes, the steaming cups of coffee. It seemed like a relic from the past, forgotten by time out here. Come morning, I continued my journey down the same lonely highway. The landscape remained barren and bleak, yet my mood was light. I found myself looking forward to stopping at Helen's again, taking comfort in the promise of a warm meal and Betty's kindness. After a few hours of driving, I approached the area where I recalled seeing the glowing neon sign. Only now there was no light to greet me, only an empty field alongside the desolate road. I pulled over, surveying the land where the diner had been less than 24 hours ago. There was no parking lot, no signage, just dirt and weeds as far as the eye could see. Had I imagined it all? No, the memories were far too vivid. I could still taste the burger, hear the bell chime above the door. Betty's face was seared into my mind. I scoured the area, hoping to find anything to indicate the diner had once stood there. But there was no trace. No foundation, no debris. It was as if it had never existed. A cold panic gripped me. I rushed to the nearest gas station, seeking answers. "The diner off Route 17, Helen's, do you know it?" I blurted to the attendant. He eyed me curiously. "Not familiar with it. Nothing's been out that way for years." My hands trembled as I sat in stunned silence, grasping for an explanation. Had I imagined the entire encounter? Hallucinated it somehow? No, every detail remained crisp in my mind, as real as the sunlight beating through my car windows. I knew what I had experienced. What I didn't know was how or why a bustling diner could vanish without a trace in a matter of hours. Unease swirled within me as I continued driving aimlessly, Betty's words echoing in my mind. "We always appreciate the company." Something bizarre had happened last night. Something I couldn't explain. I knew only one thing for certain. I had to find that diner again. I drove until I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer, compelled endlessly onward by the mystery of Helen's vanishing diner. My mind was still spinning when I finally stopped to rest at a motel. The fluorescent light flickered hypnotically as I lay in bed, replaying every detail in my mind. I rose the next morning exhausted but determined. Today I would get answers. I retraced my route, each mile marker ushering me closer to the truth. The landscape remained vacant, but somewhere out there lurked an explanation. As I neared the area, my muscles tensed. "Please still be there," I pleaded silently. Let this have been some bizarre nightmare. But as I crested the hill, my heart sank. The same dirt patch taunted me, no diner in sight. I pulled over anyway, scouring the land for anything I might have missed yesterday. Only scattered debris, some glass shards glinting in the sunlight, a rusted pipe jutting from the ground. Useless artifacts from times gone by. In desperation, I flipped open my phone to search for the diner's number. But how could I call a place that no longer existed? Defeated, I sank onto the hard ground, racking my brain to make sense of this impossibility. Suddenly, I remembered my sketchbook stashed in the back seat. I began flipping through the pages frantically. Bingo! A drawing of the diner's exterior I had absent-mindedly doodled during breakfast yesterday. Proof that my memories were real. Armed with renewed conviction, I drove to the nearest town and headed straight for the local library. If I couldn't find answers at the site, historical records might shed some light. I scoured the microfiche archives for any information about the area where I had seen the diner. As the librarian had warned, there wasn't much to find. A few brief mentions of proposed development plans in the 1960s that never came to fruition. After that, nothing but a decades-long void. I stumbled upon a newspaper photo dated decades ago that showed a large empty field. The caption mentioned it had been cleared for construction. Studying it closer, I felt a chill. That field was the exact same place where I had eaten at a bustling diner less than 48 hours ago. Dread crept over me as I sat staring blankly at the screen. How could I have such vivid memories of a place that seemingly never existed? The librarian's voice made me jump. "Sir, we're closing in 5 minutes." I glanced around, realizing I was alone. How long had I been lost in those archives? The sun was already setting, casting an eerie orange glow through the library windows. I hurried out to my car, my head swirling. Sleeplessness and stress were surely taking their toll. Yet I couldn't chalk it up to mere hallucination. Every detail remained crisp and tangible in my mind. I knew I had one more option. Tomorrow, I would retrace my steps along the entire highway. There must be clues somewhere nearby, something to revive my fading hope. The next morning, I continued forward, scrutinizing every mile marker and exit sign for anything that seemed familiar. Finally, about 50 miles down the road, a quaint diner caught my eye. "Anne's Roadside Eatery," the sign read. My heartbeat quickened. The parking lot was full of trucks, the chatter of locals spilling out the screen door. Inside, it smelled of syrup and sizzling bacon. A middle-aged waitress smiled warmly as I sat at the counter. "Morning, stranger. Coffee to start?" I nodded, pulling the diner sketch from my pocket. "Have you ever seen this place or this woman before?" I asked urgently, pointing to Betty. The waitress peered closely, then shook her head. "Can't say I have, sorry. I know most of the diners around these parts well. Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, not wanting to appear deranged. "Yeah, just thought she looked familiar. Thanks anyway." I picked at my pancakes, despondent. Out of ideas and out of time, I knew I had no choice but to abandon my search for answers. As I paid the bill, I noticed the waitress eyeing me with concern. "You take care of yourself," she said kindly. "These rural roads can play tricks on tired minds." I nodded politely and headed out the door. But I knew what I experienced had been no mere trick of the mind. Someone, or something, had made that diner disappear without a trace, and I was more determined than ever to confront that truth, no matter how unbelievable it seemed. The next few days I tried in vain to resume my old life and routines, but visions of the diner lurked around every corner. I'd catch a whiff of coffee and suddenly see Betty's face, clear as a photograph. Drive past a neon sign and my chest would tighten, half expecting to see Helen's loopy cursive letters. I knew the memories would haunt me forever if I didn't confront them head-on. Despite having no proof or explanations, I had to return to that abandoned stretch of highway one last time. As I navigated the all-too-familiar route on that overcast afternoon, I tried to prepare myself for disappointment. But an irrational flicker of hope still burned inside me, that I might spot those glowing neon letters cutting through the fog. That answers were waiting if I could just find the courage to seek them. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as the vacant lot came into view. I exhaled deeply, knowing this was my last chance to unlock the mystery that had consumed me. I stepped out of the car into the biting wind and stared ahead in disbelief. Where just days ago there had been only dirt and rubble, now stood a crumbling, deserted diner. My heart pounded as I slowly walked toward the abandoned diner. This had to be the same place, Helen's. The structure looked weathered, with boarded windows and peeling paint, but the layout aligned perfectly with my memories. I tried peering inside, but the glass was too dusty and cobwebbed to see much. The parking lot was empty aside from some scattered litter fluttering across cracked pavement. The worn open sign creaked as it swayed in the wind. I shuddered as a chilling sense of familiarity washed over me. But this deserted shell was a far cry from the warm, inviting diner I recalled. As I circled the building, I discovered a back door hanging off its hinges. I ducked inside, my footsteps echoing across dusty linoleum. The vinyl booths were split and mottled with age. Shadows danced across the panel walls under streams of sunlight straining through grimy windows. The jukebox in the corner now lay tipped over, its chrome finish dulled and coins spilled out across the floor. I stood motionless, struggling to align the decaying interior with my vibrant memories of chatty patrons and the sizzling grill. In the eerie silence, I felt the urge to call out Betty's name, as if she might still emerge from the kitchen with a pot of fresh coffee. But I was utterly alone, the only signs of life my own muted footsteps and racing heartbeat. I explored every inch, hoping for clues, some tangible connection to what I had experienced here. But there was only emptiness, stillness. No clues, just a deteriorating relic from another era. Exhausted and defeated, I sat in one of the crumbling booths, the cracked vinyl creaking under my weight. I replayed the bizarre events in my mind, still unable to stitch together any logical explanation. Moonlight streamed through the windows by the time I finally pried myself up to leave, no closer to grasping the truth. Over the next week, I became a fixture at the abandoned diner, keeping nightly vigils from the parking lot in hopes of witnessing any strange activity. Thermos of coffee in hand, I'd sit waiting as the darkness deepened, the night sounds amplifying my unease. But nothing ever changed. No lights, no visitors, no Betty. My mind churned endlessly as I sat there. I thought back to our conversation, repeated like a cryptic mantra in my mind. We always appreciate the company. Something sinister seemed to lurk beneath those words, although I couldn't pinpoint why. With each passing night alone in that parking lot, I felt myself slipping deeper into the diner's grip. Frustrated, I knew I had to expand my search for clues. I ventured into town, seeking out locals who might remember the diner or shed light on its apparent closure. But my inquiries were met with puzzled looks and dead ends. At the auto shop, the mechanic scratched his beard thoughtfully when I mentioned Helen's. Can't say it rings any bells. I've lived here my whole life. The elderly owner of the antique shop down the road echoed the same bafflement. Finally, I stumbled upon Emma's cafe on the corner, a cozy breakfast spot with flower boxes in the windows. The smell of roasted coffee beans and fresh-baked bread reminded me of mornings at Helen's. I decided to try my luck once more. The owner, Emma, was an ample woman with sparkling eyes and warm dimples. I opened my wallet to show her the diner sketch I'd made. I know it seems odd, but have you seen this place or this waitress before? Emma glanced at the drawing and pursed her lips. No, afraid I haven't, she said, handing it back to me. She studied my face and frowned. You all right, hun? Seems like something's weighing on you. I smiled politely, not wanting to get into the bizarre details. I'm all right, just thought she looked familiar. Thank you anyway. As I turned to leave, Emma called out, Now you take care of yourself here? I nodded, my shoulder muscles tensing as her words gave me déjà vu. They were hauntingly familiar to what the waitress had said at that other diner weeks ago. What did these people know that I didn't? I decided to pay one final visit to Helen's. I had to know if I was losing my grip on reality, or if something truly inexplicable was happening. The diner remained lifeless and dilapidated, offering no new clues. I sat defeated in that dusty vinyl booth until I noticed something peculiar. Behind the jukebox lay a forgotten purse. Cautiously, I reached underneath and pulled it out, stunned to see the name Betty stitched on the faded leather. Hands trembling, I opened it gingerly. Inside was an empty wallet, a compact, and a worn photo of a young couple smiling outside Helen's diner, back when it had been lively and vibrant. I stared at the photo in disbelief. This was concrete evidence that everything I remembered had been real. Betty, the diner, all of it. But it still left me no closer to understanding what supernatural force had caused it to vanish that night. Frustrated and afraid I was drifting into a realm beyond reason, I knew I had to let it go for my own sanity. After tucking the photo safely into my wallet, I left the diner for what I hoped would be the final time. Yet over the next few weeks, I found myself withdrawal into a deep depression. I stopped calling friends, skipped work, lost interest in everything that had once mattered. The diner consumed my thoughts, taunting me from the recesses of my mind. I knew the only way forward was to confront it head-on. I had to return one last time, summoning the courage to face the origin of this living nightmare. Answers were waiting there. I could feel it in my bones. As I pulled into that dirt patch on a gloomy afternoon, my nerves jittered with anticipation. This would all end today. Suddenly my stomach dropped. Just faintly glowing through the fog ahead stood that familiar neon sign. Helen's diner had inexplicably returned. I sat paralyzed, heart pounding as I gazed at the diner's sign glowing through the gloom. The very sight I had so desperately yearned to see again, now filling me with dread. Had the diner returned to give me a final chance at answers? Or to ensnare me fully into its grasp? Despite my fear, I knew this might be my only opportunity to solve the mystery that had tormented me. I stepped out cautiously, as if approaching a mirage that might vanish at any moment. But the diner remained standing before me in all its familiarity. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the weathered door, the bell chiming overhead. No customers sat in the vinyl booths. Behind the counter hovered Betty, silently scrubbing the same spot on the counter, her eyes downcast. She looked exactly as I remembered her. I stood frozen as seconds stretched by, waiting for her to notice me. Finally, in a flat tone, she asked, "Coffee?" Heart racing, I slid onto a stool at the counter. Betty poured a steaming cup without glancing up. I clasped it nervously, unsure how to address the impossible situation. After gathering my courage, I spoke up. "Betty, it's me, from all those weeks ago. I've been trying to understand what happened to this place." Her shoulders tensed, but her eyes stayed down. "We've been waiting for you," she muttered. "But it's too late now." A chill went through me. Too late for what? She finally raised her gaze, staring through me with foggy eyes. "You shouldn't have come back. But you didn't listen. They never listen." I leaned forward anxiously. "Betty, please. What's happening here? What are you talking about?" Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "You'll find out soon enough." My heart pounded as I tried a different tactic. "Is this even real? Am I losing my mind?" She let out an icy laugh. "Oh, it's real. But you'll wish it wasn't." Panicked, I slammed my fist on the counter. "I need answers, Betty. What the hell is this place?" Her expression went dark, her lips curling into a sneer. "We gave you a chance to turn back. But you just had to keep digging." She pointed a bony finger at me, eyes wild. "Well, now you'll never leave. You'll stay here and rot, just like all the others who kept searching for the truth." I leapt from my stool, chest heaving with terror as her maniacal laughter filled the empty diner. Then she vanished before my eyes, leaving nothing but a faint wisp of smoke. I stood shaking, gripped by the sense that malevolent eyes were watching me from all around the room. I had to get out, now. I bolted for the door, but it refused to budge as if held shut by powerful forces on the other side. The windows also wouldn't shatter, no matter how hard I hurled myself against them. Trapped alone in that sinister space, I crumpled to the floor as realization set in. Everything I had chalked up to fatigue or madness had been real. This was not just some abandoned diner. It was an evil entity that had ensnared me, and now it would never let me leave. As I lay there in despair, regret flooded through me. I thought back to the initial night I had stopped here when the diner was cheerful and bustling. I should have trusted my instincts when that first flicker of unease moved through me. But I had ignored the signs urging me to stay away, instead letting my curiosity pull me back. Now, I was paying the ultimate price. Summoning my final reserves of strength, I pulled myself up and staggered to the back storeroom, hoping desperately for any way out. The storeroom spilled into darkness, but I stumbled ahead anyway, arms outstretched. Finally, my hands landed on something solid. A doorknob! I turned it and the door creaked open. My heart dropped when I saw not salvation, but rows of abandoned shelves covered in dusty restaurant supplies. Defeated, I slumped to the floor. But as I gazed downward, I noticed a faded linen tablecloth draping the bottom shelves, oddly out of place. Kneeling down, I pulled it aside, gasping as I uncovered a hidden trapdoor. With trembling hands, I grasped the handle and pried it open, revealing a decaying wooden staircase that descended into pitch blackness. The diner had kept this secret, but I had finally uncovered its hidden depths. I wanted desperately to turn and run from this hellish place, but I knew answers awaited me down below, my only way out of this nightmare. I pulled out my phone and shined the dim light ahead to illuminate each creaking step. The stairs led down through choking cobwebs and dust until I reached a cramped, clammy concrete room. In the darkness, I made out the huddled shapes of human forms around me. My pulse raced. Were they bodies? Moving closer, I stifled a scream. The pale faces of men, women, and children stared back at me through lifeless eyes. Their wrists and ankles were chained to the grimy walls. A few decaying bodies sat slumped together in a corner. As I gazed into their haunted faces, the horrific truth became clear. These were others who had wandered unsuspectingly into the diner's grasp over the decades, never able to leave this awful prison. Nausea washed over me as the maniacal laughter started up again all around. I whipped my head towards the sound and came face to face with an emaciated figure creeping towards me. Betty. Her sunken eyes bored into mine. We tried to warn you to turn back, but you just had to keep digging. She shook her head slowly, savoring my terror. Now you'll never leave. A sadistic grin spread across Betty's face as she cornered me in that dank basement. This was no longer the kindly waitress I remembered. She was some sort of deranged entity that had lured me into a trap. Please, I begged, back pressed against the cold concrete wall. I won't tell anyone about this place, just let me go. Betty let out a bone-chilling cackle. Oh, it's far too late for that. You should have turned back when you had the chance. She lunged towards me, bony fingers outstretched. I barely dodged her grasp, stumbling blindly through the musty darkness and up the rickety wooden stairs. Behind me, I heard her screeching voice echo through the depths. You can't escape! This diner will be your tomb. I burst through the back room door and into the main diner, my only thought to get out of this hellish place. But escape was hopeless. The front door and windows remained immovable. Exhausted and delirious with fear, I sank down into one of the vinyl booths, wishing I could somehow undo the nightmare I now found myself trapped in. How could I have known that stopping at a humble roadside diner would seal my fate? As I sat there contemplating my doom, the jukebox suddenly cracked to life, spewing twisted carnival music into the empty space. The discordant notes seemed to taunt me as they amplified unbearably loudly. I pressed my palms over my ears but couldn't dull the piercing sounds. Then the music stopped abruptly. In the silence, a child's shrill voice cried out, "Help us! Please, you have to help us." My blood turned to ice. I spun around but saw only empty booths. The disembodied voice spoke again, desperate and pleading. "It's holding us captive. You have to get out and tell people what's down here." Then I spotted something that turned my stomach. Scrawled across the dusty window in childish handwriting were the words, Save us. The diner's victims were begging for my aid from beyond. Spurred by purpose, I knew I had to find a way to shatter the evil forces controlling this place and free the souls it had ensnared. I rushed to the payphone on the wall, praying it still held a lifeline to the outside. But the line was dead, of course. No one could know what was happening here. Deflated again, I sank into a booth, staring at the eerie "Save Us" message as I racked my brain for ideas. If I couldn't get out, how could I stop this evil for good? In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed a canister of cooking oil from the kitchen and splashed it along the perimeter of the diner, using my lighter to ignite makeshift flames. As the fire licked up the walls, I waited desperately for something to give way under the heat and smoke. But impossibly, the diner remained standing. My plan had failed. The flames died down, leaving just scorch marks surrounding me, a reminder of my useless efforts to escape. As the smoke cleared, I heard faint laughter once again. Betty was taunting me from the shadows, taking pleasure in my anguish. Rage brewed inside me. I couldn't save myself, but I could sure as hell try to take her down with me. From my pocket, I pulled the only weapon I had, a glass bottle of ketchup. Gripping it tight, I called out, "I know you're enjoying this, Betty. Seeing me suffer. But it's not over yet." Her cackle echoed through the diner. "You have no power here. This diner has consumed far stronger souls than yours." I followed her voice toward the kitchen. Inching forward, I spotted her hovering by the grill, her skeletal back to me. It was now or never. I leapt out and smashed the bottle over her head with all my strength. She let out an unearthly shriek as shards of glass rained down over the linoleum. When she turned to face me, my blood ran cold. Instead of blood, trails of maggot-like insects poured from her wounds down her face. She was barely human. "You'll pay for that, mortal," she seethed. "Your suffering will be legendary, even here." She lunged toward me, fingers clawed, as I slipped on the spilled ketchup, desperately trying to flee. But rage fueled her, and she quickly overpowered me. Her cold hands wrapped around my neck, nails biting into flesh. Delirious from pain and fear, my mind floated as I stared up at her crazed eyes. This was it. She would finally take me down to rot with her collection of lost souls. But as my vision dimmed, I saw something that renewed my will to fight, the front door of the diner, ever so slightly ajar. All this time, I had assumed escape was impossible, but somehow, in the struggle, it had cracked open. With my last ounce of strength, I swept Betty's legs out from under her, and her head hit the tile with a sickening crack. Without looking back, I crawled for my only chance at freedom. I squeezed through the narrow opening, feeling the evil grasp of the diner trying to pull me back inside. But I pushed forward with everything left in me until I tumbled out onto cracked concrete, gasping the fresh night air. On wobbly legs, I sprinted to my car. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I stared back at the now deserted dirt patch in my rearview mirror. No diner in sight. I drove all through the night in shock, too petrified to stop. By dawn, the events felt like a distant nightmare. Had it all been some sort of psychotic break? But then I felt something in my pocket, Betty's photo, real and tangible. The next few weeks passed in a haze as I struggled to resume a normal life. My neck still bore nail marks. My dreams still echoed with Betty's taunts. But the diner had released its hold on me. I was finally free. Or so I believed until one rainy night when my doorbell rang. Still shaken from my ordeal, I cautiously peered out to see a small, sopping wet child staring up at me with sad eyes. "You have to help us," she implored. "It's taking more souls. Please, before it's too late." As she spoke, her face seemed to age 100 years until it became a twisted vision of Betty herself. I stumbled back in horror, slamming the door shut and fumbling for the lock. Pressed against the door, I heard Betty's sinister cackle just on the other side. "You can't hide from me," she taunted. "I will never let you go." Frantically, I reached for my phone to call the police. But just as I picked it up, a thunderous pounding shook the entire house. The door splintered open, and there stood Betty, eyes wild and teeth bared in a vicious sneer. "You tried to destroy what is mine. Now I will destroy everything that is yours." She lunged for me, but I narrowly dodged her grasp, racing toward the back door. Just as my hand landed on the knob, ice-cold fingers clamped around my neck once again. Betty's fetid breath was hot on my face as she hissed, You will never leave me again. Summoning my last ounce of strength, I elbowed her hard in the gut, and her grip loosened just enough for me to break free. I burst outside into the raging storm, not daring to look back. Sprinting down the darkened streets, I pushed my exhausted body as fast as it would go. But glancing over my shoulder, I saw no one, only shadows flickering under streetlights. Maybe I had escaped Betty's grasp again, at least for now. But the diner still lurked deep in my psyche, ready to torment me whenever it pleased. I knew then that I could never outrun it. No matter where I went, the diner would follow, its evil seeping from my very soul. This time, there truly was no escape. And so, the shadows of the story fade, but the chill it leaves behind lingers in the air. We hope this tale has intrigued, perhaps even unsettled you, as all good mysteries should. Thank you for journeying with us through this eerie narrative. If you've enjoyed this spine-tingling experience and wish to wander through more tales of the unknown and the unexplained, remember to like this video. And to ensure you never miss a chance to peer into the shadows with us, please subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you become a part of our exploratory journey into the heart of darkness and mystery. So, until next time, keep a watchful eye over your shoulder, for you never know what might be lurking in the corners of your reality. Sweet dreams, and may your nights be filled with thrilling tales and haunting whispers.